Greetings, my friends. Do you or someone you care about live with perfectionism? Then you want to stick around. Welcome to Jackie Just Chatters. By sharing people's stories, I strive to generate laughter, inspiration, maybe help you escape from the stressful world. I am your hostess, Jackie Lentz, who's still figuring out her own story. This podcast comes out every other Thursday. I can be found wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. I'd be most grateful if you left me some stars or a review, and subscribe if you never want to miss an episode. Thank you for listening and sharing. This episode, I have a very revealing chat with Vicki Smith. She is a licensed psychotherapist and coach specializing in people-pleasing and perfectionism. She loves seeing people discover their true nature and share it with the world. Vicki brings her personal and professional experience into her work, blending her experience as a mindfulness meditation teacher with her background in body-centered yoga therapy. She helps clients get to know their whole selves. Her mission is helping folks not just talk about, but living out the life they've always wanted. Vicki and I both get personal about our struggles with perfectionism and our journey towards recovery. I have been eagerly anticipating this interview because my guest is amazing. Not only does she help people come to grips with people-pleasing and perfectionism, as a psychotherapist and coach, she is also sharing tips and tricks as well as her own journey on her podcast, Power to the Pleasers. Vicki, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was a great intro. I love that.
Oh, goody. I got an A.
Yes, exactly. As a perfectionist, you did good.
Perfectionist and teacher in me. It's the
Yes,
grading system that
yeah.
I hope I've gotten some skills as I start my second season.
You have.
And our theme is perfectionism. Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
Okay, so I personally know intimately too much about perfectionism, but for any of my listeners who are like, what exactly is perfectionism? Could you start us off with like a clinical, fancy but still relatable explanation of what the heck is perfectionism?
Sure. And it might not be clinical, but it'll be relatable. How about that?
Perfect.
So I feel like I was confused about perfectionism myself at first because I had this image or this idea that what it looked like in people was they were neat freaks or they spent a lot of time rereading their emails, which I think is something that we do. Um, and they were all buttoned up on the outside and they sort of have are their own best like PR agents, like here's my image, there's no blemishes here. But what I really started to learn about was the internal landscape of a perfectionist. And so that's kind of where I go towards the relatable versus the external, because I think that we can have mess in our house, maybe even, be wearing sweatpants outside the house. So our external image isn't so much reflected with the internal mind chatter of really what I think is the internal critic, the inner critic that makes us just feel like we're not doing it right. We're constantly assessing ourselves and comparing ourselves and judging ourselves. So I really have a tendency to lean more towards the inner world of perfectionism versus I've got a bunch of degrees on my wall and can't you see that I'm accomplished?
Yeah, the inner critic. I was listening to your podcast, which we'll get to more about later. Um, and I liked how you kind of related the inner critic to that of the voice of a coach, kind of on the
Hmm.
sidelines talking to you. And I think about my inner critic, and my coach is a jerk. that they just complain. That's all they do is complain. Well, you didn't do this right, and you didn't do that fast enough, and they're never happy. Doesn't matter what I do, I can never satisfy my coach. And I'm like, that's not a good coach. I never get a pep talk. I never
Right.
get my coach telling me, you know what, you nailed that. You did that really well. No, no, my
Hmm.
little coach never. I want a good coach. I want to trade in my coach. I'm going to
Yeah.
fire my coach, and I want a new coach. I don't know where this coach came from, but they need to get fired. Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things that I really started to get intimate with my own inner critic, was that there's really a team of them. And I
Oh God,
like,
there's more than one. You gotta
yes,
fire a whole
yes.
bunch.
No, but that's the thing, is that some of them just do a little bit extra when they're talking to us, right? And there's a few of them, it doesn't necessarily have to be good cop, bad cop kind of thing, but there's a few that have just taken on the role of the head coach when they really need to be a team of coaches, because we need an eye on us that is going to notice, okay, that could be improved. And we also need an eye on us that is like, wow, I really saw that you tried there and it just didn't match up. I like to think of the team inside, and at first it can feel like, oh my God, there's a team. But I really like the idea that there's a part of me that notices when I miss the mark. It's just I want to hear from that part in a different way.
Oh yeah. They don't talk nice.
No.
They have a foul mouth, and they're mean. They need a better vocabulary.
Yeah, they need to turn the volume down just a little bit and recognize that they're losing their audience. The message is getting missed in the delivery.
I have learned a lot about my perfectionism in the last few years, and it's so bizarre. I never knew I was a perfectionist, honestly, until the last few years. And I'm like, how did I not know this about myself? Like, I look back and I'm like, it's not exactly like it's not obvious. Like, it's
Yeah.
pretty clear. And everyone around me is like, duh, we've seen this. And then I was looking at like characteristics of perfectionism, and the one that really surprised me, because this is not something I would have suspected to be a perfectionist problem,
Hmm.
procrastination.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I have always struggled with procrastination. And when I was reading and explained that you procrastinate because you're afraid of making the wrong choice and not the perfect choice. And I'm like, oh my God, who's been reading my journal? Like, who got in
Hmm.
my head? That's why I can't make a decision. I would always tell my friends from like when I was young, my version of hell, what I thought hell would be like, is a 500-page menu and having to pick a meal. I'm like, oh my God, I'd starve because I could never be able to pick. I would just spend eternity weighing the options of every single dish and drive myself crazy.
I hear you. And I love that you picked the procrastination out of the list, because it is kind of this, it's a, when you peel back, when you lift the hood of the car, whatever analogy you want to look at, it's what's going on inside, which is why I love to look at the inner workings of the perfectionist part of us. Because I think about procrastination as another part of our personality, that perfectionism and procrastination are kind of doing this tug of war inside. And perfectionism is like, let's do this. And it has all these expectations, these standards. They're, above achieving anyway. The goalpost keeps getting moved, kind of thing. And then there's the procrastinator on the other side of the tug of war rope that is going, you know what? If we get into what you want us to get into, we're going to feel all types of discomfort and unpleasant feelings, because we're not going to be able to match up to the standards. And we know that, but we're going to push ourselves, and we're going to get tired, or we're going to, yeah, we're just never going to, achieve the gold standard anyway. So I'm going to pull harder on my side of the rope, and we're just going to put it off.
Yep.
We're going to go for the small wins. We're going to, I remember one time sitting at my desk, and my desk is at a window that is at our back porch as well. And I was looking outside and I was like, I could sweep off the back porch because it was fall and there were leaves on there, or I could do this thing. And I remember clearly deciding sweeping off the back porch is going to make me feel like I did something and I'm going to be able to see it. And this other thing has a much longer lifespan to it, and I'm not going to get that immediate gratification. And I consciously chose to get up, put my jacket on, pick the broom up and go outside instead. And I was like, "Oh, this is what's happening." So
I don't do that kind of thing at all, ever, never.
you cannot relate to that in one.
No.
No. And neither can
Oh,
anyone else,
oh no.
frankly.
Oh my gosh, when I went to your website and I saw your what perfectionism looks like on the inside and how it forms your behaviors, and I'm like, check, check. Yep, struggle with that.
Mhm.
Check, check, check. I'm like, okay, yep, there is no question perfectionism is my problem, and I've gotten better with it since I've learned more about it. I force myself to do more risk taking.
Oh.
Like starting the podcast, that was one of my attempts to overcome the perfectionism.
Oh, hell yeah, I agree.
I didn't know what I was doing. I came up with this idea. I'm like, well, that sounds like fun. It sounds creative. It sounds interesting. And part of my brain immediate was like, you have no idea how to do this. You don't know what you're doing. This is stupid. You're going to just be awful at it. And I'm like, you know what? Shut up. And I'm like, okay, we got to jump. We got to jump off the cliff. No, no safety. We just have to go, because if I give myself any alternatives, it will not happen. So within 24 hours, my first episode was out. I went on this research binge on how to do a podcast. Please don't
Uh-huh.
ever listen to my first episode. It's really not so great.
I'm
Start on
going
like
to.
episode 4 when I actually started to get a better clue. Because I see on these websites of like this, I belong to like this podcast group, and people are talking about like months of
Mhm.
how they plan and how to start their podcast. And I'm like, we're just a little shameful of it. We're not going to talk about like, I just jumped off the cliff, and I'm like, please be a soft landing. Please be a soft landing.
I love you for it.
It was fine.
Yeah.
I have been jumping ever since. I have the first time I met up with somebody to do an interview, all these different things. There's that voice in my head, that coach telling me, don't do it. You're going to screw it up. You don't know what you're doing. You're not a professional. I'm like, you know what? Shut up. I don't have to be a professional. I can be an amazing amateur. I don't
Yeah.
care. Go. Risk it. Risk everything. And if you fail, you
But
fail.
see, you must have some trust in yourself, because a lot of us just stop before the starting line, right? Is what you're talking about. I
Yep.
mean, you said like this is going to be, I think about it as like whenever you're trying something new, obviously we know the term learning curve. None of us are comfortable with. But there's something about just the experience of being in that discomfort. If you want it, I don't want to say want it bad enough, because that's not really what I mean, but if you're okay with the experience of like your lungs hurting because you're trying to, start running or something. Like I started drumming when I was 45.
Wow. Fantastic.
I know. And it was like I had heard these women talking about what they called ladies rock camp, and they formed this band over a weekend and they write a song and all this stuff, and some of the women are musicians and some of the women are picking up the instrument for the first time, and I just thought, I've always wanted to be a drummer, and I'm just going to dive in like you did, right? and extremely uncomfortable the whole time. But afterwards, I was like, somebody needs to help me do this because I want this to be part of my life. And yeah, I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. I was holding the drumsticks in the wrong way. But I got coaching with a fabulous coach, and I felt like there was something in it that I wanted. I guess I'm going to say it bad enough.
Yep.
I wanted the experience of feeling the groove and being in the groove of a song. Like there was just something that was calling to me. And so I did it not poorly. I did it without knowing what I was doing at first. Like I'm not even going to tell myself I did it poorly because it just isn't the true story. It isn't the realistic story that
You were
I can look
learning.
back on. Yeah, I was learning. There's a well-known psychologist. His last name is Winnicott. I'm forgetting his first name right now, but he talked about women, and it was women in the 50s that were parents, and they were doing most of the mothering, the parenting at the time. And I think he started seeing women in his practice that were really harshly judging themselves for how they were managing the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he started talking to them about what was good enough parenting. And I just latch on to that term good enough. And I kind of overlay that to things that I'm doing. And like you're talking about with the podcast, this is good
Yes.
enough right now.
You know, it's a catch-22. Like, I have gone back a couple times and listened to that first podcast. Part of it makes me cringe. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that was so bad." But at the same time, if I can step back analytically, I'm like, "Wow, you know what? In a year, I think of how much growth I can measure from that. If you listen to my first podcast to my last podcast of my first season, wow.
Right.
Wow, how much growth I made. And I go back and I listen to it, and I'm like, "You know what? I'm still probably doing 60 to 70% of the same things I did then." So,
Okay.
clearly, it wasn't so bad.
Right.
You know, I learned a lot in those 24 hours and used all of my, like, teaching skills
Mm-hmm.
that I had a lot of soft skills that I didn't realize
Right.
were so applicable, and I'm like, "You know, I know it's not perfect, and you have improved a great deal,
Right.
but for a first one, it could have been so much worse. For a first one, it's good enough."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, putting yourself out there, think about how vulnerable that is.
Absolutely. It is totally an act of bravery, vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
and I have thought so many times about yanking that first episode. Over and over, I think about taking it
Oh.
out so that I'm like, "Oh my gosh, if somebody listens to that first one, they may never listen to me again because I
Mm-hmm.
get so much better." And then I'm also like, "Nope, I'm sorry, you don't get to.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna leave that out there."
Mm-hmm.
Because there may be a few people that they listen and they're like, "Wow, that's changed. That's improvement." That's part of the journey. That's part of the story, and if I don't include that, I feel like I'm not being authentic, that
Yeah. So
I'm
there you go.
lying to people about myself and my journey. You know, we need to share. I think it comes part of my teaching thing of being a living role model for almost 20 years to my students.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I need to share with the world, not always, but in a decent enough measure, my screw ups and be that vulnerable person and push myself because there are going to be people out there who are perfectionists like myself and be like, wow, somebody messed up. Somebody did not hit the mark
Yeah.
and they're sharing their shame. They are sharing it out there. And then, oh my, she's laughing. She's laughing about it? You can do that?
Oh, yes.
That's my goal. That's my goal, is to get myself to be like, "Dude, come on. It's it's a freaking podcast episode. Nobody died."
Right. I have a headband that said "Nobody died" that I wear when I work out. Actually, it says, "But did you die?" And it's like, no. The answer
When you
is
start using
no.
that as your measuring stick, it starts to put a little perspective on things. Did anybody die? Nope. It was a good day.
But see, the 2 words that I'm gonna pull out for what you said are authentic and perspective, because it's not necessarily that we have to poke holes in that perfectionist's, um, standards or anything like that. We can have those standards. We can hold that to ourselves because we all want to escape judgment and rejection, right? So that's what
That's
the
true.
perfectionist is trying to do. That's why that part of us isn't our enemy and we don't have to fire it. We just move it to consultant status because we are authentically showing up with this interest, this eagerness, this vulnerability, this innocence of learning. And the perspective that you have as a teacher, like I can imagine you starting out with your students in the beginning of the year or when the semester changes or however that worked for you in your school, and knowing that they can't pass the test today, but that you're going to take them through what they need to get to passing the test, and that you're completely okay with them fumbling and learning and molding their understanding of the material until you ask them to put it together in this conclusive way on the essay part of the test or something like that, right?
Right.
And so you have this completely different perspective that's one of compassion and openness and exploration. And yet they're sitting there already, because our minds do this, going, I can't fail this. I can't mess this up. And so, how you work with that part of you that starts a process, knowing that you understand how students start a process, it's like you have all those parts of you inside. And that's why you have a standard for your students. I want you guys to pass this. But I also know that you're going to be working your way through the material. And you know what I mean? It's like we have the
Absolutely.
student and the teacher in us.
And that's helped a lot when I could hear that voice in my head, because there were so many times I would tell students, or honestly, adults. Adults are the worst for this, because students are still they're learning and they understand this concept more, but I taught high school, so they start to get a little less forgiving.
Hmm.
You don't know anything until somebody teaches it to you. I would tell my students, I'm like, "You know what? When you came into this world, you know what you knew? How to eat, how to poop, and how to sleep. That's it. That's all you knew. Nothing
Hmm.
else. You had 3 things you knew. You know how many things you know now? And the only
Right.
reason you know any of them is because somebody else helped you learn them." I go,
Yep.
"So if somebody in this class doesn't know something that you do, you never shame them. You do not put them down, because they just haven't learned what you learned. And don't get cocky. Somebody handed that knowledge to you.
Hmm.
So have some good grace and share it with somebody else."
Hmm.
So when I freak out of, like, I'll try a new recipe and it goes kaput and it's
Oh.
awful, and then I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, you did so," and I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. You knew nothing. You're learning, just
Hmm.
like your students. Dial it back."
I think that's how you work with your perfectionist part,
Yes.
right?
And it's one of my best tools, and I'm so glad for my time teaching. and my
Mhm.
experience of watching other people learn and struggle with, you guys can't see me, I'm air quoting failure,
Right.
because you know, we stumble before we walk.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little too much about my story with perfectionism. I want to hear yours.
No, I'd rather talk about yours.
On your show, I'll be happy to come over and share some more, but you're on mine. So Vicky, let's hear about yours. When did
Ah.
you start with your struggles with perfectionism? I apologize for the cliffhanger ending there, folks. My chat with Vicky went too well, though I guess you can't have something go too well. We just talked for so long and we talked so much, there was no way I could fit it all in one episode. So I'm making a part A and a part B of this interview. So if you want to hear about Vicky's story, which is very compelling, very interesting, very brave, lots of varies there. Sorry about that. Check part 2, B, whatever I'm going to call it, and you can hear the conclusion of our interview. So I hope you will go over whenever you've got time, or maybe you've got to, like, I have to finish this right now. You know, whatever. It's all good. I don't care. The rest of it will be over on the second half. I will mention it there, but I'm going to mention it here as well. On the episode notes, I am going to put, for both of them, all of the contact information for Vicky and the links to her website, her podcast, all that kind of stuff. So even if you don't get to 2, you can definitely go check out her stuff, which I really, really recommend you do. Okay, see you guys on the flip side.